genel izleyici kitlesi için uygundur.
Saat Farkı'ndan merhabalar. Her hafta farklı ülkelerden konuklarla farklı perspektiflere yer vermeye çalışıyoruz. Dünyayı Ekotürk ekranında buluşturuyoruz. Bu hafta Almanya'dan kıymetli bir konuğumuz var. Özellikle tabii 6-9 Haziran tarihleri arasında gerçekleşmekte olan Avrupa Parlamentosu seçimleri öncesinde aslında İstanbul'a geldi. Burada Harici isimli dış haberler, dış politika platformunun İstanbul'da düzenlediği bir konferans için geldi kendisi. Avrupa için Gelecek Senaryoları isimli bir konferans. Biz de bu hafta biraz bunun ışığında konuşacağız. Hem Avrupa Parlamentosu seçimlerinin önemini ve bundan sonra özellikle Avrupa'da yükselen sağ tehdidine karşı ne gibi değişiklikler olabileceğini konuşacağız. Hem de biraz Rusya-Ukrayna savaşı gölgesinde, İsrail'in Gazze'de devam eden vahşetinin gölgesinde biraz Avrupa'yı konuşacağız. Almanya'dan çok kıymetli bir Avrupa uzmanı, Avrupa çalışan kıymetli bir isim, siyaset bilimci Profesör Doktor Ulrike Guérot bizlerle. I hope I pronounced correctly, Professor. Welcome to Istanbul.
Hi, many thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you, Professor. Well, we have a lot to talk today. The elections are happening, European Parliament elections. It's very symbolic and also important. I mean, not only symbolically important, but also it will have an impact on the future of European, as it will probably take a sharper turn to right wing, unfortunately. So we will talk about that as well. But let's start with some geopolitical changes in the especially past 5 years. A lot has changed in the last 5 years. First, COVID, we had pandemic, and then Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the growing energy crisis, and the recent Israeli attacks on Gaza. So a lot of geopolitical changes happened during this time. Let's start with those changes. How, especially these geopolitical changes, have an impact on Europe's security front, especially in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and then we will talk about Israel in particular.
Well, yes, I mean, thank you for the question. And yes, indeed, we are in troubled times. I mean, with respect to the European Union, I mean, everybody is, but there are two conflicts now. And it's very hard to see that there's not only a threat on security for Europe, but also a threat on unity, because when the Russian invasion started, or the war started, the idea of the European Union was to unite basically in a war supporting Ukraine. Yeah, that's the immediate reaction of the European Union, that Europe stands with Ukraine against Russia. And the problem is, in a way, that 2 years later, after we see this conflict evolving, that this has some potential to split the European Union, because the European Union in itself is less united in this than it seems, or than the EU pretends. We can see that not only Orban, but also other countries, whatever, Greece, Spain, other countries, or Slovakia, are not following this armament sort of politics, that we need to deliver arms to Ukraine, and that there's a lot of, ambivalences, even in the Franco-German relationship, even with Macron and Scholz, who just had a visit. Macron was just visiting Germany, and you see that the Ukraine war and the standpoint of Germany and France is slightly different. So what in the beginning was a sort of unifying momentum, Europe stands united with Ukraine, is showing basically problems with two respects: with respect to our security and what is Europe doing now, and with respect to European unity. And both, I think, are very interesting to observe, because security is the one thing, whether you define it in only delivery weapons, or whether you define security, what was basically the memory of Europe. You remember that we did the European integration and the European Union project for 70 years, saying Europe is no longer war. So there is obviously people in European countries claiming for negotiations and saying that Europe should stand up and basically do diplomacy, go for diplomacy and do negotiations now, and that the American interest and the European interest, because NATO obviously is now, everybody knows this, that there is NATO involvement, increasingly escalation, and also that basically the American interests and the European interests are not congruent, that Europe has different interests in that conflict than the United States, which is a little bit off, because Europe is now paying the high price for this conflict, because it's about, you know, the agreements of support, financial support, military support, and so on and so forth. So Europe is risking to be not secure, to be split, to be driven into an escalation, and none of this is good for the European continent.
So the Europe has been following mainly US-American interests till now. Can you say that? And do you think it will change? I mean, the European Union will be more unified, less dependent on the US. Do you see any chance of this?
Well, you know, it's not framed as following American interest, yeah, but there's NATO, and then there is a framing that we need to defend sort of the freedom of the free world. Yeah, that is basically how this conflict is framed. But I think we are not listening enough to the potential of negotiations. And if you look back basically to the negotiations which took place in April in Istanbul, April 22nd, that there was apparently a chance for peace, and which was torpedoed by the West in a way, then there is a question of the prolongement of the conflict. Then there's a question, who wants to prolong the conflict? Yeah, I mean, the West is pretending that Russia wants to pronounce, but we hear different voices from Russia that Russia is ready to negotiate. So, you know, there is an open sort of struggle on who pretends what in this conflict. There's also an information war, obviously, yeah?
Right.
So, and
who's mainly benefiting from this prolonged of the war, by the way?
Well, I mean, it's detrimental for Europe, that you can say. Whether it's beneficial for the US is a different story, yeah? But it's definitely detrimental to Europe, because it costs Europe a lot in military terms, in security terms, in social terms, in economic terms. If you look at the agreements of, you know, support for Ukraine at the last EU summit in December last year, so there are basically contract signs for assistance for 10 years now. So the biggest thing that I fear for Europe is that we end up in a situation like with Afghanistan, yeah, where you have a sort of frozen conflict, which is not a hot conflict, but, you know, which is not ending. And because it goes on and goes on, is basically dragging on resources, dragging economically and so on and so forth, and with no end in view. And I think this cannot be in the interest of Europe. And again, I mean, I want just to remind, we are celebrating 70 years of the European Union sort of project, which wanted to be a political project, a project about no more war in Europe. I mean, that was what we told in every single speech over years, yeah, that Europe is a project, no more war. And so I think there's a duty and an obligation for Europe to do everything to promote peace and to stand up for negotiations.
So sending more weapons and potentially sending even more weapons to Ukraine is not going to help the I guess?
Well, you know, von der Leyen just tweeted today, I think, that she is going to, because she is expecting to win the elections with the European People's Party, and in the case that the European People's Party has the most of the voting outcome, then von der Leyen would probably be elected as in her second term for the European Commission. And there was a tweet of Mrs. von der Leyen basically saying that she wants to be very bold about creating a European defense shield, you know, and basically going for a militarization of the whole European project, which will cost a lot of money. If that is true, I just want to consider, or to be considered, that when we started with the European integration project in the 1950s, you know, Robert Schuman, Jean Monnet, and so on and so forth, again, it was built to be a peace project. It was built to have a security architecture with Russia, and we basically said you get security through peace and not peace through security. Yeah, so we turned around basically the mission statement of the European Union, and I feel like this is it's a very single-issued sort of framing that we still have in the European Union, that only through a military sort of confrontation we will win the war. You know, there's all this talk about Russia does not, we don't allow that Russia to win. You know. So we only open eyes for a military conflict solution, and I think we do not explore enough the other means, which is diplomacy and which is negotiate. And I think it's very urgent because everybody knows we are talking today in a moment where apparently there has been attacks on Russian radar systems, that there's even a nuclear escalation. So as a German, I'm talking as a German, I'm confronted as a German citizen with a history in which from basically German territory was the starting point of 2 world wars. I do not want to see an escalation for a third one.
And a potential Russian victory is really as vital, a critical, a very serious threat to the security of Europe, do you think? What will that mean?
Well, I personally don't believe this. I personally think that there is an information bias in European press, in German mainstream media, not German, but French and other media. I think that we underestimate the readiness of Putin to negotiate. He said it very clearly in his interview with Tucker Carlson. We pretend that Russia is not ready to negotiate, and we also pretend that Putin is imperialistic. So you can read speeches. I mean, we can have different assessments on this, but this is the overarching story in the Western European media. There are other voices, some dissident voices in some of the European countries, in Greece, in Spain, in France. I mean, there are some dissident voices, and they argue that Europe has nothing to win in an escalation scenario and pushing only for security. And they say we have everything to win, going back what I said to the idea of a security architecture with Russia, which, if we can just remember, was the goal of Europe in the 70s with Willy Brandt, Egon Bahr, Olaf Palme, Kreisky in Austria. And it's basically what we wanted with the Treaty of Paris of November 1999, after the wall came down. And we basically said, now it's Europe whole and free, and we built a political union in Europe, and then we built a peace order with Russia. Right. And I would love the European discourse going back to this idea, because I think it was a very good idea. I think also it worked. I think we need to reactivate this.
Do you think it will happen? Especially considering also, let's talk about that, and I will then move to Israel. Let's talk about at this point the elections, because a lot of people and also early polls show that there will be a sharper, let's say, turn to right. Far right, extreme right, and how will this have an impact on several critical issues within the EU, do you think?
First, the question, well, do I think that this happens, that we go back to the sort of the old dreams of what Europe should be? The more we talk about it, the more it's likely. If we stop thinking about it, then we don't get it. But if we start talking, so thank you for the occasion to say this in Turkey in your show. I think there is a point to make that we should say it loud. And there was just a manifesto of some European intellectuals that you may also see on Twitter, who basically would call for peace and negotiations. You have had the Pope, the Vatican calling for white flags. So the more we talk about it, perhaps we can animate a discourse that we need to change course in this conflict. Now you ask me about what we call blue wave in the European elections, and yes, there is a lot of insatisfaction with the European Union and its mechanism, be that the climate deal or the green energy deals, or be that the European Digital Service Act, which is having some features which are, say, semi-authoritarian, and control features through this, all this legislation on digital control. So yes, I think the European Union is in bad shape because it has alienated from its citizen. Most people see in the European Union, meanwhile, a technostructure, a technocratic sort of monster, if I may say so. Because it was meant other way. And perhaps it's important to remember that in 2003, the European Union wanted a constitution, and we wanted a democratic political sort of entity. And by then, it failed. The European Constitution project failed in 2003. And since ever then, the European Union became ever more technocratic. We had the banking crisis, and then this European Euro governance, and then the refugee crisis, and then the Green Deal, whatever. So there were ever more technocratic discourses, and the so-called populist parties went against and basically saying, we don't need this EU, we want to Brexit, Dexit, Italexit, Polexit, all the countries want to exit the European Union. So again, there is a huge resentment against the European Union. On the other hand, there is a strong wish to have Europe. So most of the discourses in all the countries, be this in Italy or in Poland or in Hungary, Germany, France, are now developing in a sense that we do not like the EU in its current state, but we want Europe. There is a desire to have Europe. I mean, even the so-called nationalist or populist parties are not being against Europe, saying my nation first and I only want my nation. So what they are saying is we are living in structures of the European Union which are slightly not democratic, not transparent, which gives us policies we cannot control, but we need a different Europe. And I'm very, very curious to see the results of the European elections, whether this sort of discourse can emerge. Yes, there will be probably what we call a blue wave, so an increase, also because probably the voter outturn will be very low. And the lower the voting is, the more you have populist forces. So I'm very curious to see what this means, but then the real question is what happens afterwards, what the coalition building will be, because, for instance, you saw that after some problems in Germany with the AfD. Marine Le Pen moved the AfD out of this conservative right-wing group at the level of the European Parliament. So we will see a total reshufflement of the coalition building after the EP elections, and it will be very interesting to follow this.
Professor, at this point, I also want to talk about Europe's response. I mean, we talked about Ukraine war. There is no unified approach, but we also see this was the case with regard to Europe's response to the war, Israel's war in Gaza, of course, and the gap has grown wider with some countries in Europe taking a more critical approach towards Israel, especially Spain, Norway, and Ireland formally recognized Palestine as a state. So my first question will be specifically about your country. Let me understand it first. Let me ask you first, because Germany's support for unconditional support, just like the U.S. For Israel, has also harmed its reputation in the region, especially. So we are also trying to understand. People in the region are struggling to understand this fact. So I would love to hear your perspective. German officials have repeatedly said the country bears a special responsibility for Israel's security due to its Nazi past. So I want to ask you, how did this memory of Holocaust shape its policy? Is it the reason, or the only reason, or the main reason, or there is another reason for this unconditional support, considering that it's still a major, probably the biggest, second biggest arms supplier, despite all this genocide continuing in Gaza, in Rafah, and elsewhere?
Well, I mean, first let me state that obviously Germany has a special responsibility to look politically at this conflict, and obviously the right of existence of Israel is out of question. Yeah, it must maintain. The problem, I think, in the German discourse, and that's what you asked me, and I want to say that I'm, a dissident voice, because there is a German, a tendency, or even sort of soft legislation that is calling for unconditional loyalty with Israel. Yeah, that's what you quoted. Yeah, and I feel like unconditional, the underscoring unconditional, unconditional loyalty at any price, what Israel does, cannot be what we call German Staatsräson. Yeah, so I think in that respect, the German discourse is very, very problematic. Yeah, and the German discourse, the problem of the German discourse is that we tend to do this, and we didn't do it in previous years, but we tend to do that all legitimate state critique of state behavior of Israel or Netanyahu, that this is anti-Semitism. Yeah, so we are crossing the two things, and basically the one doesn't belong to the other. Yeah, so you should do criticism of Israel's reaction, and this is no anti-Semitism. And you have even Jewish people, even Jewish Orthodox people in the United States, for instance, who are saying this. Yeah, and there was at the beginning of the conflict, if you remember, there was a huge talk about in the critical sort of journals, Free Palestine from German guilt. Yeah, so that the German guilt brings Germany. So the intention is good, which is guilt. Yeah, but if good intention can produce bad things. Yeah, and I think there's something in discourse happening here. I feel very sorry for my country because I would love Germany to make a difference between anti-Semitism and critiques of Israel again. Which are not the same things. And I see Germany, as you said, being singled out of the international community, being singled out in Europe, yeah, because now the critical voices within Europe are growing. Yeah, you mentioned Spain, you mentioned Norway, you mentioned Ireland. Germany is singled out in the international community. It is singled out with its positioning in the European spectrum. There is precisely the struggle whether you call it genocide or not, yeah, and we have been seeing the European Union failing on this, that basically there was no European sort of text written mentioning the word genocide, so there is a real struggle about the wording that the European Commission does. But as you say, I think Germany is singled out, and I would also argue that in the past days, I saw first, important dissident voices also in German national radio. Yeah. So I feel like Germany is now capturing that it overdid the argument, and I think there is a sort of backpedaling now that Germany is feeling that it's losing the argument, and obviously the argument is that we all want to condemn the kidnapping of the 7th of October. There's no doubt about it, but there is still a difference between defense and vengeance. Yeah, and I hope that my country, I mean, that Germany is perhaps, let's say, moving a little bit back, because perhaps that story is important. There were some apologies now because we had a conference on Palestine in Berlin. And Yanis Varoufakis, the former Greek finance minister, wanted to attend, and then the police basically came and the conference could not take place, and then Yanis Varoufakis was more or less thrown out of the country and banned from the country, even to a point that he could not do Zooms with Germany. And now Varoufakis is, I think, doing a court prosecuting Germany. So there is a court case now, Yanis Varoufakis against Germany. And the Ministry of the Interior is already sort of backing down. There were some apologies that they overdid it. So all these are signs that German authorities are now realizing that perhaps they overstretched the argument.
But do you think still, I mean, even if they change the course from now on, because in the region probably you feel the same thing, European Union, Europe, or let's put it in a broader context, Western values, have been questioned during the course of the past years. Sure. Hypocrisy, double standards, selective morality, when we look at the reactions to two horrible wars, of course, we are not justifying the war in Ukraine, or Russia's Ukraine. Also, Russia did terrible things, but we didn't see a similar or same reaction, Russia's war in Ukraine and Israel's war in Gaza. So do you think the West in general has been losing or has lost its reputation, credibility in the eyes of people? Also, when we consider the recent protests in Western capitals, do we see that?
Thank you for the question. And, my problem is that I agree with you because I'm a dissident voice on most.
I'm just asking you because I want to know if people are aware of this.
Yeah, just let me explain perhaps for a Turkish viewer who's viewing this interview. Yeah, so I think that my opinion on these topics like Ukraine, Gaza, and a couple of others are not representative because, again, I'm a dissident voice. Yeah. I would argue that the discussion in Germany is slightly breaking up and that the dissident voices are gaining ground, saying that, perhaps the Ukrainian war is lost already and that we should look at the victims and so on and so forth. And with Gaza, I just told you that there's something like a breakup, that reversal of the discussion, But let me tackle the most important point of your question. For me, it's a tragedy. It's really a tragedy that the European Union, which was built on rule of law, on projecting soft power, on projecting no more war, on building a political entity. That's what we wanted. You remember perhaps the famous book of Jeremy Rifkin, how the European dream is eclipsing the American dream. And that was the moment where I was, doing studies on all this. And I was, many times in Brussels, we Europeans, we wanted this, yeah? It was the time of the Iraq war, of the Americans, and we wanted to build Europe as a global entity in a different sense. And now we see that basically all what we dreamed of, this rule of law, soft power, and so on and so forth, Europe is just dying, and that Europe is militarizing, and at the same time developing a hypocrisy, that we are the West and we have what we call a rule-based order. Nobody knows what this rule-based order is. It's not even codified. Whereas we ignore the UN law, I mean, that's a question, right. South Africa going against Netanyahu at the ICC. And then, I mean, we have a huge discussion in Germany now whether this goes through, whether the court ruling of the ICC and then Netanyahu is in Germany, do we arrest him or not? I mean, this is bringing us into deep trouble, because I think the arrogance and the hypocrisy of the West was trying to build up a parallel order, our order, the Western order, the rule-based order, which is not codified. And now we see emerging the BRICS countries together with the global South. And we see that on both conflicts, like Ukraine and Gaza, we are the global South together with the BRICS countries are not siding with the West. And we go into a deep confrontation between the West, or what formerly was called the West, and the emerging countries, BRICS together with the global South, who anyway have a majority in the UN voting, if you look at the Gaza voting at the UN and also everything that is taking place at the United Nations level. So I'm saying this because I'm fearful for Europe, because I would love Europe to have a self-reflection on what we are doing, self-reflection that we are not the good and the others are necessarily evil. That's how we frame it. Most of the country I'm living in, but sort of the Western discourse is pretty much that we have the values and we are defending the values and we are the goods and all the others are bloody dictators, And that is a little too easy, and I would urge Europe to find a self-reflective modus on rethinking what we are doing, what we are doing in the world and with the world, and how we want to place ourselves in these conflicts. I think there's an in-depth need in Europe to do this intellectual work, and I hope after the European Parliament elections this work can begin.
Let's all hope that. We are about to finish, by the way. Time is up, unfortunately, but since you're in Istanbul, and I think it's not your first time in Istanbul, in Turkey, so do you want to say anything regarding Turkey's position in the EU, any words on Turkey's position, especially, or Turkey's future in the EU?
Well,
is it still on the table?
First, I want to say that I'm very, very happy and glad to be back in Istanbul, basically after 20 years, because I was very often in Istanbul in the years 2001 to 2004 when Turkey prepared EU accession. So I was very often here, and I loved it. And now coming back 20 years after, it's quite interesting.
Is it still possible, Professor?
Yeah, it's quite so. I think the accessions are now, I mean, we opened the chapters, but it's frozen now. It's frozen because then everything turned around. But if you look at the European Union and a difficult situation that I tried to sketch out, we will move into, in the next sort of legislation of the European Parliament, into huge questions. And one is the enlargement question, because everybody's talking now about Ukraine in the EU, but then there are the Balkan countries waiting since 20 years. Then there's Turkey waiting since 20 years and promised since 64. So I can hardly see that the European Union just, put Ukraine just easily into the European Union, disrespecting the Balkans and disrespecting Turkey. So it needs to be a global package. And the global package then is in institutional terms nearly unbearable, because if you put Turkey and Ukraine and the Balkan into the sort of big enlargement sort of thing, and you end up with, say, 35 countries, what is the institutional mechanism in Europe? And I think we have to think these questions through. And that might be, I wouldn't say a chance, I do not want to overstate it, but it might be a moment in which sort of a Turkish voice could be brought back, that sort of, we are here, we are still here, you froze, the negotiations are frozen, but if now there's a big thing in Balkan and Ukraine and all this is negotiated sort of in a, say, end game scenario, what is the future of Europe and what is the role of this Europe, and can it still or again be a political democratic Europe? What's the future of Europe? I think it would be nice to have a Turkish voice. and it will be food for thought. Anyway,
let's see what's going to happen after the elections. Then maybe we will do another show after the elections. Thank you very much for joining my show, Professor. It was a pleasure to meet you.
My pleasure.
Evet, Saat Farkı'nda bu hafta Avrupa'yı konuştuk. Almanya'dan Avrupa çalışan, Avrupa özellikle güvenlik konularında Avrupa'nın iç ve dış politikası üzerine de oldukça yakından çalışan, bu konuda makaleleri, kitapları bulunan kıymetli bir siyaset bilimci bizlerleydi. Profesör Doktor Ulrike Guérot bizlerleydi. İstanbul'daydı, bir konferans için gelmişti. Avrupa'yı konuştuk. Önümüzdeki hafta yine farklı bir konuyla, farklı bir konukla karşınızda olmak dileğiyle. Hoşçakalın.